Welcome to the Thomistic Mind with Dr. Reed. I'm Dr. Jason Reed, Associate Professor of Philosophy and Chair of the Theology and Philosophy Department at Divine Word College Seminary. In addition to teaching seminarians and religious at Divine Word, I also teach those in formation for the Permanent Diaconate Program in the Archdiocese of Dubuque, offering courses like the Philosophy of God, Christology, Metaphysics, Epistemology, and Trinitarian Theology. Here, we walk in the footsteps of St. Thomas Aquinas, exploring the mysteries of existence, the nature of God, and the pursuit of wisdom that shapes the soul. That journey begins now. Welcome to the Thomistic Mind. This is episode number 14. I'm Dr. Jason Reed. I host the Thomistic Mind, and we have been spending quite a few weeks on the nature of logic, principles of logic, and if you've been with us so far, you've been learning things about validity, arguments, soundness, premises, propositions, forms of argument, things that really very few schools even offer anymore. Very few colleges, seminaries offer logic anymore. So one of the reasons that I wanted to do that is because at the beginning of these series of talks by the Thomistic Mind, I came across a student at a college, and as I was discussing logic with them in that conversation, I saw two things. One, just how interested they were in learning logic, the excitement of learning how an argument works and that there's objective rules for inferences and you can find the truth. That's actually something you can do. And that's the appeal of logic is the instrument of philosophy. Logic is the instrument of reason that helps us find truth. That's the overarching takeaway from all these weeks, is that. And then the second thing was that as the student was interested, he asked me where he could study and learn it because they didn't have it at their own college. And that's why I thought, you know what? I know this is, many of you listen to this through the audio version of the Thomistic Mind, so you can't see necessarily what I'm maybe illustrating, or you can't see me talk about these things, so it's all audio. And also, it almost feels like a class sometimes. It's a lot of information, and it can be sort of overwhelming, although you're still attracted to it. And that's how philosophy and logic sort of operate, right? Is that when you start to get into philosophy and logic, you start to developing a Thomistic mind, one moves away from trying to be entertained. One moves away from just trying to find something that's quote-unquote interesting. What you're being subjected to, maybe, or what you're being introduced to is probably more accurate, is something that can actually help you in your life and help you think and come to correct conclusions. Namely, it's a compelling thing, right? When you start tipping your toe into the logic and the philosophy streams, you start to realize, wow, this is something that isn't necessarily having a good time, as they say. In the world we live in, everything's so entertainment and so right here, right now, and run to the microphone and give the first response. That I thought the Thomistic Mind should be something different than that. That this is more of a more patient, thought-provoking, long-term, right, big picture program. And so, yeah, sometimes you'll have to listen to an episode several times. Maybe sometimes you have to have maybe something to write things down, which is fine. Again, it has that feel of a classroom, and I think that's just the way I talk. So that's the way I approach things. Is from the auspices of being a professor in a seminary and class. So if you're with me so far, it's obvious you love these sorts of things and you find these topics compelling. And the last talk, episode 13, dealt with self-refutation, which we're going to continue with that today. But I want to kind of give you a heads up and a big picture of kind of where we've come from and where we're going. Again, this is episode 14, so I'm going to be talking about the previous 13 episodes somewhat and kind of where we're going with episodes 15 and following. That as these principles, the logic we've been talking about, as we look to the future, these things are going to come up again. And you'll begin to see all the practical payoff when it comes to these things. I know people, life is short, time is short. Everyone's very busy in life, and people need things that can help them. They need things that can improve their lives, and things that they can, in a sense, absorb and understand and use. So there's two aspects, right? When you're learning theology, we're learning philosophy, you're learning logic, there's going to be two aspects. And for better or for worse, one has to understand and be aware of both. The first thing, and I'm speaking to everybody, professionals, the young, the retired, right? Those who are in the middle life, 40s, 50s, everybody, there's two aspects. The first is you have to learn the terminology. That's just the way it is. There's no way of getting around it. If you want to grow in your thinking, if you want to grow in your arguing abilities, you have to learn the terminology, and at some level, at least the basic terminology. And you think about anything you want to do, right? If there's anything you're interested in, if you want to learn how to cook, you got to learn the terminology. If you want to learn how to go into gardening, you got to learn the terminology. If you're going to go into sports, you've got to learn the terminology. If you want to go into carpentry and construction, you've got to learn the terminology. That's just the way it is. And so what I've been doing and trying to give you in the logic episodes is really just the basic terminology. Because this is 14. In episode 15, it will be basically a summary of all the things we've been talking about in logic. It will be the takeaway episode. It will be episode 15. Okay. In 14, in this one, we're going to go through the terminology of self-refutation, and then we're going to go through necessary and sufficient conditions, and that will complete. So keep that in mind. This will complete a basic grasp, the foundational concepts and ideas of logical thinking. And then 15, we will give big picture, the things you should, the takeaways, what you, in a sense, what I'm expecting one to know after the first 14 episodes. Okay, and then we'll take a break for a couple weeks, and then when I come back, start recording again, we're going to dive into the life of St. Thomas Aquinas. We're going to be looking at the book. If you have, I know some of you probably have the book, but if you don't have it, you're going to want to get G.K. Chesterton's book on St. Thomas Aquinas, because we're going to spend a couple weeks on I'm going to go through the life of St. Thomas. Chesterton alludes to a little bit of his life, but I'm going to give a chronological account. It's a fascinating life that he lived, so I'm going to spend probably an episode and a half, maybe two, it depends, for sure at least an episode and a half, laying out the life of St. Thomas Aquinas, and then I'm going to lay out and go over the outline of the life of G.K. Chesterton. So we're going to see the life of the guy that he's writing about, the thinker he's writing about, and then we're going to learn about the life and the character of the man who wrote the book. So you have a nice, bird's eye view of what's in the text, why Chesterton wrote it, all those sorts of things. And then for 4 episodes, probably 17 through 20, we'll be going through and highlighting key aspects of Chesterton's book on St. Thomas. The older versions the old version's title of Chesterton's book is An Introduction to St. Thomas, the Dumb Ox, and we'll be talking about why he was called a dumb ox. So if you see that title, that's the same book. I think today's publishers dropped that, which is unfortunate because that's the way that was Chesterton's title. So after we go through, again, about 4 episodes on the life of St. Thomas and Chesterton's book, how does Chesterton understand the implications, the why we should study him, and all the highlights of St. Thomas, then we're going to finish out the year looking at the errors of modernism. As we'll see, as you get through Chesterton's book on Thomas, one of the bigger takeaways is that St. Thomas is very much the saint for our times. And the reason why St. Thomas is, at least in Chesterton's eyes, mainly the saint for our times is because St. Thomas is so anti-modernist. Not anti-technology, not anti-inventions, not anti-industry, anti-modernism. It's that ism that we'll be looking at. And so we'll finish up the year with looking at all the errors of modernism and then how St. Thomas solves those. So that's what's coming up as we finish out the first year of the Thomistic Mind. Again, if you need to get the book, you've got a few weeks here to get the book and get it on your shelf. Chesterton's book, Philosophy, the Introduction of St. Thomas. And sometimes they come together. There's one version of the book that contains both Chesterton's book on Francis, which he wrote before St. Thomas, and then Thomas's book together. So there's one version, one copy. I think it's by Ignatius. I'm pretty sure that's right, where it contains both Chesterton's book, both on Francis of Assisi and Chesterton's book on St. Thomas Aquinas. Or you can also just get the book by itself. Okay, as promised, we will dive into and do a little bit of review of self-refutation, self-contradiction. If you've ever seen the movie A Christmas Story, I've mentioned this last time, right? Little Ralphie wants to get a BB gun for Christmas, and the mother throughout the movie said, "You're going to shoot your eye out." The teacher says, "You're going to shoot your eye out." Santa Claus says, "You're going to shoot your eye out," right? That's the idea of ricocheting, right? Well, self-refutation or self-contradiction, or sometimes called self-stultification, is the idea of an idea going out and coming back and hitting itself in the eye. Statements going out and hitting themselves in the eye. And when you see this, when you understand the logic of self-refutation, you can never unsee it. When you get the idea and grasp the understanding of self-refutation, you can never unsee it. And one will see it everywhere, especially in the internet. So again, to review, what is a self-refutation? Well, self-refutation is when a statement, someone's claim, refutes itself. When a statement contradicts itself. And we give examples like, no English sentence is longer than 3 words. Well, there's an English sentence that is longer than 3 words, meaning what? It self-refutes itself. It shoots itself in the eye. It commits what we might call the Ralphie fallacy. Okay, but I just came up with that. Could be if you're trying to remember this, think this is the Ralphie fallacy, where the statement shoots itself in the eye. Probably the biggest philosophy, the biggest modernist error that shoots itself in the eye is relativism. There's so much relativism and skepticism. As I was teaching on this is like, episode 13, between episode 13 and this episode 14, these recordings, again, this is the Thomistic Mind with Dr. Jason Reed, and we're looking at self-refutation, and I'm going to be talking about my latest encounter with self-refutation. So there's a what do you call it, an acquaintance of mine, and I don't know how we got on this topic. We were discussing faith, the truth. It might have had something to do with something in the paper, or had something to do with, anyway, there's something about Christianity being true. He was watching YouTube videos, and he was watching skeptics and atheists go after Christianity. And of course, he knows I'm a philosophy professor at a Catholic school, so he thought he would talk to me about this and what I had to say about it, and what I teach about it, and those sorts of things. And during the conversation, this sentence, this claim came out of my acquaintance's mouth. All truth. No, he said, the only thing you can know are facts. The only thing you can know are facts. So I asked him, so is that a fact that you know? Is that a fact? Is what you're saying right now a fact? And what did that lead to? Well, he qualified, well, he means scientific facts. You only can know scientific facts. Like, okay, follow-up question. Is the statement that you're making that we can only know scientific facts, is that statement itself a scientific fact? And this guy thought about that. He's like, he really didn't know what to say, because he felt like I was tricking him. I said, I assure you, I am not tricking you. I assure you, I am not trying to confuse you. And I was very honest with him. I said, I think there's a sense in which you're actually confused, and now you're coming to terms with the confusion. He said, what are you talking about? I said, you're confused about knowledge and where knowledge comes from and how people talk about their knowledge. I said, because this little statement that you believe, that the only things we can know are scientific facts, that one statement is keeping you from really embracing and thinking about Christianity and thinking about the Bible. Am I wrong? He said, no. He said, if we can't know anything beyond scientific facts, well then everything's faith. I mean, you've got this religion and that religion. You've got Islam, Mormonism, Catholicism. It's all just a bunch of opinion. It's all just people believing these things because they either raised that way or they gives them life meaning. Also, we started going down this psychological rabbit hole, because if it's not a scientific fact that you believe it, then you can't. Then no one knows their own religions, and then you start to the quick move then is to give a psychological analysis of why people have these beliefs. Again, we try and explain their beliefs from their origin, from their situation, from their family, from their communities. Just go down the line. So there's a lot at stake here. There's a lot going on just from this one simple statement. And I said, well, if there are facts that you can know that are not scientific, then would it be possible at least, would we made at least logical space for the claims of Christianity? He asked me, well, can you repeat that? I said, sure, I'll slow down. If there are truths, facts that we can know that are not scientific, then is it possible that Christianity could be true? That we could know that? Meaning, because our knowledge would no longer be limited by science, then at least in principle there'd be other modes of knowing, like history, like philosophy, etc. He said, sure. He sees that, yeah, but he said there isn't any. I said, well, you've actually given me one. What? He said, you've given me one fact that you claim to know that isn't scientific. I said, what's that? He said, the truth that the only things you can know are scientific facts. That statement is not a scientific fact. And this is where the dialogue really started to heat up. I mean, it's really, I could see the gears grinding, because I've been there myself. I mean, you're really coming to terms with a self-defeating statement. Everything changes. I said, here's what you can do. Write down the sentence. Just write it down on a piece of paper. So he wrote the statement down. The only thing you can know are scientific facts. Okay, look at that. He said, okay, I'm looking at it. How is that right there on the page a scientific fact? Like, if it is there a scientific experiment behind it? Is this a scientific theory? And it wasn't too long he started to see that he had shot himself in the eye. And much to my surprise, he went full-blown skeptic. Well, if we can't know, if that's not a scientific fact, then maybe we don't know anything. Not even science. And so that was another conversation. But the point and of course, and then skepticism becomes a self-refutation. So he saw that the statement, we can only know scientific facts, he saw that shot himself in the eye. That was a Ralphie fallacy. That was a self-refuting statement. And then instead of being then open to other truth, the next statement he says, well, maybe we don't know any truth. Maybe there are no truths. Maybe we can't know anything. So I said, well, write that down. What, write down that I can't know anything. Maybe there is no truth. Maybe we can't have certainty. And every time he wrote something down, or every time he wrote a statement down, he started getting exhausted. Well, I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to say I can't know. I don't know how to say that our truth is limited. I don't know how to say these things. I said, because it's impossible. The moment you try to deny truth, the moment you try to deny knowledge of reality, the moment you try to deny certainty, the moment you try to affirm skepticism, the moment you try to affirm relativism, they all collapse. They all collapse. Which means, and that's where I quoted the scripture to him, as Romans 1 says, this is why we are without excuse, because we cannot not know these things. I'll say that again. We cannot not know. We cannot not know. Now, that doesn't mean, and this is where I was very quick, Lord, thank you, God, to warn this friend of mine, acquaintance of mine, that doesn't mean that now the truth is obvious. It doesn't mean that, okay, because it's self-refuting to deny certainty, because it's self-refuting to deny truth, because it's refuting to deny objective truth, to deny absolutes, it doesn't mean that all of a sudden you've got knowledge of it yet. No, it's going to take a lot of work now to find the truth. It's going to take a lot of work to find. You've got to make arguments. You've got to look at different views, different philosophies. But now we're off and running. Now you can actually start to inquire. Now the question of does God exist is now a real question that you can ask, and you can start to investigate it. Is Jesus Christ the Son of God? You can now really ask that question. Did he rise from the dead? Are there objective moral truths? Do human beings survive death? Do we have free will? These are now all on the table. That is an entire life's journey through ideas is now laid before you. You've got no excuse now not to investigate. And now the pursuit becomes personal. Do you want to find the truth? Or are you just happy not thinking these things? And Chris and I left it at that. The power of self-refutation. It opens up inquiry. It helps open the mind. It helps open the will. Because we're told early on in our schooling, by our friends, by the culture, no one really knows. We can't find the truth. It's all relative. And the sad thing is that these ideas are so easily refuted. You can refute them in minutes, seconds. Imagine if we were able to help people see their self-contradictions. Help them to see that they are basing their rejection, or they're basing their lack of interest in seeking out the truth on a self-defeating idea. Again, this is the Thomistic Mind, where we look into philosophy, theology, logic, in the footsteps of St. Thomas Aquinas. I'm your host, Dr. Jason Reed. If you've just joined us, we're talking about the Ralphie fallacy, Christmas story, the self-defeating statements, and how they are everywhere. And so in a sense, we are helping heal the mind, because when someone's mind is believing contradictions, right, they shot themselves in the eye, and it hurts. So to push the metaphor of Ralphie further, to unpack more what's in the metaphor, is that different than when Ralphie is a logical fallacy, is that one doesn't know that they've shot themselves intellectually in the eye. Okay? So unlike Ralphie, who tried to avoid that, right? He was warned not to shoot that because he's shot in the eye. When you do commit fallacies of self-refutation, then when that gets pointed out to you, you can actually, metaphorically, can feel the pain in your eye. You can feel the pain in your mind. That is, when you start to come to terms with self-defeating, it kind of hurts the mind. Well, it's not hurt the mind. You realize that it's, in a sense, needs to be healed. It needs to be overcome. These contradictions need to be removed and jettisoned. Need to be open to truth. Open to find the truth. Okay, we just got a few minutes here of our first segment here, where I'm trying to hopefully drive home the idea that there are many ideas out there that are self-defeating, that many times that when we talk to people and dialogue and watch things online, all the skepticism, all the relativism is rooted in a very simple fallacy that's committed all the time. Self-refutation. So I'll leave you with this, the first segment, and then when we start the next segment, we're going to look at necessary and sufficient conditions, and that will again round out our series of episodes on relativism. Sorry, on logic, excuse me. Sorry. Round out our episodes on logic. Ask yourself, when you hear an idea, pay attention to the claim, either spoken or written. Spoken or written. And then ask yourself, does this statement or claim refer to itself? There is no truth. Is that a true statement? There are no absolutes. Well, is that absolutely true? There is no certainty. Is that certain? There are no truths outside of science. Is that a truth outside of science? So on and so forth. And if the statement fails to follow its own criterion, to follow its own claim, then we get a logical boomerang. We get the logical ricochet. We get the logical Ralphie shooting himself in the eye. Again, and when you see this, you can't unsee it. You'll begin to notice this all over the place. Now, it takes some skill, it takes some know-how, it takes some work to try to walk through the ideas of self-refutation. It's not, what might be surprising is it's not, when a person's believing a self-contradictory statement, it's actually hard to see that it's self-defeating. It's hard to see that it's self-refuting. Because they're using the idea to think about other things. They haven't thought about the idea themselves. Like my friend had never thought about the actual statements coming out of his mouth. He just took that as a truth. Yeah, unless it's science, you can't know it. He'd never thought about the idea itself. Okay, so that ends our first segment here on the Thomistic Mind with Dr. Jason Reed. And after this short break, we'll come back and talk about our next topic, necessary and sufficient conditions. The Church teaches that a solid education and grounding in philosophy is necessary to find the truth and avoid error, to understand the mysteries of divine revelation, to grasp the Church's doctrine, and to engage an unbelieving world. Philosophy is so valued by the Church that she requires it to form the intellectual life of her priests. Read Thomas is an online program created to make this intellectual formation more widely accessible. Developed and taught by Dr. Jason Reed, the courses combine academic rigor with a spirit of faith, presenting the great themes of classical and Thomistic philosophy in a way that is clear, structured, and faithful to the Catholic intellectual tradition. Participants encounter fundamental questions of philosophy through topics such as the pursuit of wisdom, an introduction to philosophy, an overview of philosophy's origins, methods, and enduring questions. There's He Who Is, examining the classical view of God's attributes and their theological and spiritual implications. We also have the mystery of existence, the philosophy of creation, exploring the metaphysical principles underlying the doctrine of creation. Then we have the three-person God, the mystery of God's inner life, a philosophical study of the Trinity's inner relations. There's also St. Thomas Aquinas' philosophy of the angels, where we consider the nature and role of spiritual beings in Thomistic thought, and further courses that engage the treasures of the Catholic intellectual tradition. Read Thomas seeks to cultivate not only knowledge, but also a deeper appreciation of the harmony between faith and reason, helping participants enter more fully into the wisdom of St. Thomas Aquinas and the Church's philosophical heritage. The website is www.readthomist.com. That's www.readthomist.com. Email is read.thomist@gmail.com. That's reed.thomist@gmail.com. At Read Thomas, we believe the life of the mind is for every Christian. And we're back to the second segment of episode 14 with your host, Dr. Jason Reed. This is the Thomistic Mind, where we try to love God with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength. And we just finished up last segment on talking about self-refutation. Hopefully that's more clear to you now what self-refutation is and how it's committed all the time, and you can see it everywhere. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. In the second segment of episode 14, we're going to dive into necessary and sufficient conditions. These are ideas that are literally used all the time on the one hand, yet with very little to no awareness that they're being used on the other. And when I say they're being used all the time, I mean it's all the time. So for example, especially in politics, in debates online, whether it's in a Facebook chat, or if someone is making a TikTok video, or there's some sort of YouTube channel, whatever, they're going to be talking about necessary and sufficient conditions. For example, there's a lot of debate now about what constitutes an act of war. Is X, whatever X is, an act of war? Well, that is a question about what's necessary and sufficient. So you'll see people go back and forth, and some people will say, well, the act is an act of war because this country A invaded country B. And then someone will respond and say, well, no, wait a minute. There are times where country A invades country B, and it's not war. And moreover, there are times, and they're talking to their interlocutor, like in a panel discussion, and someone will say, wait a minute, if you're saying invading makes something an act of war, then where were you when this other leader was invading other countries, and you didn't think that was war? Back and forth. Is an act of war, what's required for a legitimate act of war? Well, do we need congressional approval? And someone say, yes, without congressional approval, it's not a legitimate war. Okay? Or it's not a legitimate act of a leader. Then someone would say, wait a minute, but if that's the case, then how come in other situations where you had someone, a leader, do the things you're talking about without congressional approval, but you didn't say that was an illegitimate move, so on and so forth, all the time. Or if we're talking about whether someone's responsible for their actions, they'll say, well, they knew what they were doing, they had time to react, and so therefore they were responsible. And again, another debate will be, no, wait a minute, just because they had time to act at split second and they didn't have time back, just back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Well, how does one get clarity? How does one, especially as a culture, how do we heal and bring these conversations so that we can actually have some fruitful dialogue? Well, one way of doing that is making this use of what makes something an act of war, what makes something an act of responsibility, what makes something legitimate, illegitimate, so on and so forth, if we make explicit the use of necessary and sufficient conditions. Because that's what's going on here, right? When you're asking, is something, is an action, an act of war, you're asking about necessary and sufficient conditions. So when one person argued, say, well, there was an invasion. Well, then that's sufficient. That is, if there's an invasion, that guarantees that that act is an act of war. Counterexample. No, that's not sufficient because we have instances of invasions that are not acts of war. And so invasions may be required for an act of war, but it's not sufficient. So that would be necessary. So on the Thomistic Mind, what we're going to do, and we're going to investigate here for the next 20 minutes, is really try to understand the distinction between necessary and sufficient conditions. Necessary and sufficient conditions. So we have to, in a sense, have to put our thinking caps on. And again, you're going to see this all the time. First, what is a necessary condition? A necessary condition is something that's required for something else to occur or to exist, although it doesn't guarantee it. A necessary condition is a condition that is required for another condition to obtain, to exist, though it doesn't guarantee it, although that is sense it's not enough. It cannot do it by itself. And this is where you'll see tons of debates over, especially in religion. For example, what's required to be saved? Is a person saved? Some people will say, well, unless you're explicitly in the church, you're not saved. That is, if you are an explicit follower of Jesus Christ in the Catholic Church, then you're saved. So, being saved is necessary for being in the church, for example. Okay? And we'll look at, an example I'm going to look at here in a few minutes is going to be baptism. Is baptism required for salvation? Must one be baptized in order to be, quote unquote, saved? If the answer is yes, then being saved, if someone's saved, then you know they've been baptized, for example. So necessary condition is a condition that is required for another condition, but does not guarantee it. Okay? And everyone has to find their own way of understanding these ideas. And the way I understand the idea of necessity is this, is that fire needs oxygen. Fire needs oxygen. That is, the presence of oxygen is a condition that fire requires. However, oxygen by itself does not guarantee there is fire. It's just something that fire requires. So therefore, oxygen is necessary for fire. Oxygen is necessary for fire. Remember, I do this all the time where, it might surprise you, maybe not, when we have campfires or fire pits out in the back with the young kids, I'll ask the kids, what's necessary for a fire to be had? Or I'm about ready to put I haven't had anything in the fire pit yet, and I'm trying to give them a logic lesson whether they know it or not. So here's this fire pit. Okay, what's necessary? And they say, well, you got to have something to burn. Okay, so we got to have something to burn. That's necessary for fire. So they grab the wood, they put it over, and they put it in the fire pit. What else? Is that it? No, we need something more. Oh, cool. So it's necessary, but it's not enough. So we need something more. What else do you need? Well, you got to have heat. Okay, so I light the match, and there's the heat, and there's the wood. Is that enough? No, you've got to be able to take the heat, and the kindling needs to become hot. Okay, so that gets going, and then I blow out the first little bit of the wood starts to catch on fire. Then I blow it out. I said, why did that go out? I mean, we had the wood, we had the fire. Why did it go out when I blew on it? And they said, well, it needs oxygen too. So when I blow out the small flame, then I'm taking the oxygen away. Yes. Okay, so what's necessary for fire is something to burn, heat, and oxygen. And when you bring those together, you have what's called the sufficient conditions for fire. So when we're making a fire in the back, we just don't want the necessary conditions. We want the condition that guarantees that the fire will take place. And that's the sufficient condition. A sufficient condition is something that guarantees that another condition will obtain. Okay? Sufficient conditions guarantee the other one, whereas necessary conditions are required for the other one. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully that makes sense. So that's the jargon. That's the logical side. Now let's test your knowledge. Let's practice identifying necessary and sufficient conditions by the following pairs. So if you're listening, if you're driving, or if you're just listening to the audio, just try to get these ideas in your mind and try to connect them. So I'm going to give you 3 pairs of sentences, and I want you to determine which condition is necessary and which is sufficient in each pair. Okay, first pair. The car is blue. The car is colored. The car is blue. The car is colored. Second pair. The ball is shaped. The ball is round. The ball is shaped. The ball is round. And finally, Smith is human. Smith is a person. Smith is human. Smith is a person. Again, once we get these down, we can start actually doing some serious theology and philosophy. This is really going to help you, obviously, if you want to teach these things too. So anyway, that's just a little plug. So what's the answer? Maybe you've already got it. So in the first pair, the car is blue and the car is colored. Be thinking about which is required for the other and which guarantees the other. Okay. Does being colored guarantee the car is blue? The answer, of course, is no. Being colored doesn't guarantee that the car is blue. Why? Because you can have other colors than blue. So a colored car doesn't guarantee it's a blue car. However, if a car is blue, must it be colored? And the answer is yes. Why? Because if a car is blue, it guarantees it's colored. And therefore, being blue is sufficient for being colored, but being colored doesn't guarantee it's blue. However, it is necessary. Right? That is, being colored is necessary for being blue. So you could reverse it, right? This kind of, if you remember the modus tollens and modus potens, that's where you're going to find these things. So if the car is not colored, it can't be blue. So therefore, being colored is necessary for being blue. So what you'd say is, right, blue is sufficient for colored. Colored is necessary for being blue. Again, this is just part of learning and grasping and having a Thomistic mind formed. Okay, that's what this channel is all about. Okay, because as we get into, again, more philosophy later on, okay, I'm referring to episode 14, episode 13. You can go back and listen to these things and watch these things and continue to learn them and have your mind shaped by them. Okay, speaking of shape, our next pair of example is the ball is shaped and the ball is round. The ball is shaped and the ball is round. Well, if the ball is round, must it be shaped? And if the ball is shaped, must it be round? Okay, well, here's why shaped is necessary and round is sufficient. Because being round guarantees it's shaped. Being round guarantees the ball is shaped. And therefore, being round is sufficient. But one cannot be round without being shaped. That is, being shaped is necessary for being round. So therefore, the shapeness is necessary for the roundness. Again, think about arguments over war, over whether or not certain tax levels are valid or not, debates over whether or not Jesus Christ rose from the dead, if Christianity is true, if God exists. You're all looking for necessary and sufficient conditions constantly. Like, what would guarantee that God exists? You're looking for the sufficient conditions. What was necessary for the resurrection? I mean, like, what would the resurrection require? Well, then you're looking at the necessary conditions. Okay. Give a more practical example. If you're trying to convince, say, your spouse that you want to buy a new house, you're looking for the conditions that would guarantee that you should get a new house. And then what's your spouse going to ask you? But what's necessary to get that? Right? So, yeah, you've made the case that guarantees you should get the house, but what's that going to require? What's going to be necessary for that to happen? Round and round and round. Okay? All right. So there's some fun examples. And you can do fun examples ad nauseum. So if you ever get a chance to take a logic course, you'll learn a lot more about these sorts of things. Anyway, this is enough at least to get you, to make you dangerous, right? Little knowledge makes you dangerous. Okay. Our third and final pair is Smith is human. Smith is a person. Smith is human. Smith is a person. Now, why does this seem tricky? Or why would it, maybe not to you, but why would this seem tricky to some folks? Why would Smith is human? I'm going to say it slowly. Think about it. If you got it already, that's okay. If Smith is human, Smith is a person, why would this be difficult for a lot of folks? Well, I've taught this many, many times, and what happens routinely is people think that's just the same thing. Well, aren't humans persons? Aren't persons human? Not necessarily. There's that term again. Think about debates over abortion. Debates over abortion. What would be necessary for an act of an abortion to be immoral? Okay. So a lot of people will argue that abortion would be immoral if abortion were the killing of a person. So there are many pro-abortion advocates that will say that if an act is the killing of a person, then it is immoral. And moreover, if it's the killing of an innocent person, it's immoral. But they don't think that the unborn, the being in the womb, is a person, although they would be willing to admit that biologically it's human. And so why is the unborn, although biologically human, but not a person? Well, because they'll think persons have self-consciousness, persons have self-determination, persons have self-awareness, all these sorts of things. So there's a big debate about that. Okay, then what happens? Well, when a person is trying to defend abortion, says that a person has to have self-awareness and then they're a person, well, then what's the counter to that? Then the people who are against abortion say, well, when you are asleep, you're not self-aware. Or what if you're in a coma, you're not self-aware? Those are called counterexamples, which means what? That personhood cannot be cannot be guaranteed by self-awareness, because we know there are persons who lack self-awareness. Okay? And of course, then self-awareness actually comes in degrees. If you're taught a 5-year-old, 5-year-olds don't have a lot of self-awareness. And I would argue many adults don't have 100% self-awareness, so myself included. Okay, see, philosophy can be funny. Okay, but that's about as funny as I get right there. That's not If you don't laugh at that, I can't help you. Okay, so meaning that there is a debate about whether one can be a person and human. Do these necessarily go together? And so when you start to think these things through, you start to say, wait a minute, yeah, they're not the same thing. So then what's the relationship between them? Well, being human, can you be a human and not be a person? So I can't argue for that here and now, but for the Catholic philosopher and the Catholic theologian, they would agree with those who would say that being human guarantees you're a person. So humanity, being human, is sufficient for being a person. Now that doesn't necessarily mean that the person is fully developed. So you would say that the unborn is not potentially a person. No, the unborn is a human person in potential. That's what one way you could say it. But so being a person is necessary for being human, but doesn't require it. So what does that mean? Well, in the tradition, right, and particularly in the scriptural tradition, we have persons that are not humans, i.e., angelic persons. And this might surprise some people. Again, this is the Thomistic Mind. We're coming up here near the end of our second segment of episode 14. And we've been talking about necessary and sufficient conditions. I'm really hoping that this really helps you, that you begin to see, understand these concepts, maybe start thinking about ways in which you could apply them and see them and use them. And especially when it comes to this idea of person, and this is where you see how Christian the ethos of our world is, because the word person, in terms of our philosophical, political nomenclature, right, when it really becomes a concept of law, a concept in philosophy, a concept in theology, a concept in just everyday discourse, comes from the Christian doctrine of the Trinity. The big emphasis on personhood is a function of Christian theology. Why? Because the word person in its etymology meant a mask. A person meant you had a mask on. You were impersonating. That's sort of one of the roots of the word person. It meant you are impersonating. You are putting on a mask as though you were someone else. And so the early church fathers, in particular Tertullian is an example, the Cappadocians, they were trying to explain against the heretics of the Arian heresy and the Sabellian heresy is how can there be three in one? How can there be three subjects? How can the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost be three and yet the very same being? Because what's odd about the Trinity is that the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost are the same thing. That is, they are the same being, but there's some distinction between them. Somehow the Father is other than the Son. And so what the early church fathers used was the word person, because person had this idea of subject, that is, subject versus object. And if you think about yourself, no pun intended, if you think about your own life, you think your own awareness, there's a sense in which there's the objective side to you. That'd be the side that, say, a doctor is looking at, or the police officer is looking at your actions, or someone else sees your hairdo or the way that you walk, right? They see the objective side, right? Just the things that can appear. But then there's also the subjective side, right? There's your awareness of something, right? There's a subjective side to your being, right? The subjective aspect to your consciousness, to your existence. And so the church fathers said there's this idea of subject, this idea of me or I, is something that cannot be communicated. That is, although that when parents, for example, give life to their children, they give their nature to their children, but they don't give themselves to their children. That is, the child is not some sort of just taking two being and mashing them together. No, what they are is the fruit of that union, and so the parents communicate, give to the offspring the nature of humanity, but they don't give the subjective. They don't give they don't give their person. And that this idea of people, of two humans generating a third human by giving the nature but not themselves, this idea of they can't give their personhood, is how we're going to understand how the fathers helped to explain the Trinity. So this idea of person meant that the Father, when he generates the Son, he gives the Son divine nature, but he doesn't give him his fatherhood. That is, who he is, he does not give to the Son. And that word person is what the fathers use to explain how it is there could be three in one. It's three in person, one in being. So you've got divine persons. So just because someone is a person doesn't mean they're human. We have three divine persons. Then you have the angels. The angels are persons, but they're not human, right? Because they are pure spirits. And so now we're thinking, wait a minute, so we've got divine persons, human persons, angelic persons. What makes them all persons? Well, humans have intellect and will. That's why the human animal is a person, unlike non-human animals, because non-human animals do not have reason. They don't have self-awareness. They don't have intellect, and they don't have a will. I'm sure that's probably got a whole bunch of animal lovers upset with that. So maybe you can have an episode in the future where I can talk about how animals are not persons. But just, I can't argue for that now because I'm like down to a minute left of this segment. So maybe this is a hook. You'll come back later to see me defend the idea that animals don't have reason and will. But anyway, but if they did have reason and will, if your puppy has reason and will, it would be a person, put it that way. So humans have intellect and will, angels have intellect and will, and divine, the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit have intellects and wills. We're all knowers, and we're all we choose freely. That's a sense in which we are all human. All persons, in which we're all persons. So that means then that being a person is not sufficient for being a divine, angel, or human, although it is necessary for those three. Being human guarantees you're a person, sufficient. Being angel guarantees that you're a person, so it's sufficient. Being the Father, being the Son, being the Holy Ghost is sufficient for it guarantees that they're persons, therefore it's sufficient. Okay, I'm literally down to 1 minute left of the Thomistic Mind, episode 14, segment 2. So I'm going to leave you with this thought experiment, and we're going to pick it up at the beginning of episode 15. And it's this: is baptism necessary or sufficient for being saved? Is baptism necessary or sufficient for being in heaven? That's the question for episode 15. And so in our next episode, we will explore that question and look how the church looks at it. So until then, may you love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and yes, with all your mind. You've been listening to The Thomistic Mind with Dr. Jason Reed, produced by Mr. Matt Graham. To learn more about our rigorous philosophy courses, visit us online at www.readthomis.com, www.readthomist.com. It's been a privilege to journey with you through the world of philosophy, seeking truth, goodness, and beauty together. My hope is that today's conversation encourages you to think more deeply, live more wisely, and love more fully. Until next time, keep your mind fixed on the truth and your heart set on the highest good.